Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel where today we are going to be doing my January mid-month wrap-up. So we're going to talk about everything that I read and DNF'd in the first 2 weeks of January, starting with Cheer Up, Love and Pom-Poms by Crystal Fraser and illustrated by Val Weiss. So this is a young adult contemporary romance graphic novel, and in it we are following our two main characters of Annie and Bebe. Annie is a senior in high school and she's got the academics down, but she has zero extracurriculars and she's fairly antisocial, so she ends up getting pressured into trying out for the cheerleading squad. Enter Bebe. Bebe is the cheer captain and a trans girl, and she also used to be friends with Annie. And because she used to be friends with Annie, she knows that Annie is great at gymnastics, so she basically insists that Annie should be on the team. And of course, because they are now on the cheer team together, that allows for them to rekindle their friendship as well as maybe allow sparks to fly. And the story goes from there. So this is great, honestly. I loved these characters. They are distinct and they are also just kind of adorable to watch together. I loved that watching Annie figure out how to be sensitive to other people's feelings and their needs, and I really loved watching Bebe try to figure out how to stand up for herself. One of the main themes in this book is figuring out, as a trans girl, how to stand up for yourself when safety is such a huge factor in that. And watching Bebe figure out that yes, she can stand up for herself and not necessarily risk her safety was just honestly a joy to watch. I basically read this in one afternoon with a big old smile on my face and like teared up at the end because Annie had this absolutely perfect line. It was just really great. I only had one minor issue with it, and that's basically we're never told why Annie and Bebe stopped being friends. And so between not really knowing why they weren't friends and not they never really had a conversation about becoming friends again, and then of course time the time that they had where they were becoming friends again was more like montage. It just ended up feeling fairly rushed. I think that there are a number of things that could have been done to make it not feel rushed, like them just having a small conversation about it. But this is fairly minor given that this is only 124 pages. You really don't have a whole lot of time to do that. And it didn't really hinder my enjoyment of this at all. And so I ended up giving this 5 stars. So then after that, I picked up Radiance by Catherine M. Valente. So Radiance is a deco-punk, pulp, science fiction, alt history, space opera mystery set in a Hollywood and solar system very different from our own. This is also adult, just so you know. And there is more of a description, but that's really what kind of got me hooked in. And I DNF'd this. I DNF'd it at page 24. I read the prologue, and honestly, I just did not gel with the writing style at all. In that prologue, all I could think was, oh, this is pretentious. And it's not terrible. It's like not the worst pretentious I've ever seen, but it's I don't generally like pretentious. Also, the writing style is flowery and like cousin to like steampunk writing, which I don't like either of those things either. And so it's not bad, it just really wasn't good, and it made me not want to try to like get through this whole book. So I just decided to go ahead and DNF it after that prologue. And then I picked up Gem and the Holograms, The Misfits by Kelly Thompson and illustrated by Jenny St. Ong. So this is, I think, the 6th volume in the Gem and the Holograms series. And in it, we are following the rival band, the Misfits. And each issue, we actually take a deep dive into one member of the Misfits, getting some of their backstory as well as weaving in what their concerns are in the present day. And I think that this was done very, very well. I loved all the stories. I think that they were very well done. And it actually lent a lot of interesting backstory to all of the characters, so you get much more of a sense of who they are. The art style in this is fine. It's not my favorite. It's just like that kind of thing. It's not. Some of the gem and the holograms I've liked better than this. Some of them have been worse. It's very much middle of the road. It worked well enough for me. But overall, I do think that this is a really good addition to this series, especially since I have been very curious about this rival band for the first 5 issues or 5 volumes. So I am very happy to have read this, and I end up giving it 4 stars. And then after that, I picked up, well, I continued my read of A People's History of the Vampire Uprising by Raymond A. Villarreal. It was a holdover from December. But essentially, this is a fictional account of how vampires came to be in the United States and globally, honestly. It is written in a very nonfiction style. And this is another one I DNF'd. I made it about 125 pages. And the idea of this is very interesting. I like a lot of the ideas in this, but I don't think it was quite enough. There were too many questions. There just wasn't quite enough. Like, I was intrigued, but not enough to kind of pull me along through this story. But also, it's told through like firsthand accounts as well as primary documents. And I found the primary documents to be incredibly boring. So where I stopped, about 125 pages, is actually in the middle of a chapter. And the chapter was an opinion letter from a Supreme Court justice on a case where a vampire was claiming that vampirism should be classified under the ADA, or the Americans with Disability Act, which means that his employer discriminated against him for being disabled because they were unwilling to accommodate his nocturnal schedule. Which, honestly, that sounds fascinating. I love that kind of world building where you really think it out. But reading the actual opinion letter was so boring. I mean, if you're into like primary documents, this is probably going to be great for you. But honestly, I'm not. And having to try to get through that when, again, it's not quite interesting enough, like the story itself isn't quite interesting enough, it just wasn't working. So I ended up DNFing at page 125. And then I picked up Warcross by Marie Lu, and this is a young adult science fiction novel, the first in a duology. And in it, we're following our main character of Emika Chen, who is a hacker. And one day she is in the virtual reality game Warcross. She is watching the opening ceremonies, and she decides to try a hack. And this hack accidentally glitches her into this, not opening ceremony, but like a game that's being played and watched by everyone. And so instead of, prosecuting her, the owner of this game decides to hire her to help him track down somebody else who's been hacking into the game and damaging the code. And the story goes from there. So I will say that this is not an amazing book, but it's a fun book. I found myself just swept away by this story. It was a very fun, easy read. I did find the first part of it to be a little repetitive because Emika is very poor and she is on the brink of losing her studio apartment. Like, it's really bad. And so there's a lot of time spent driving home just how poor Emika is and like how it's going to affect her life. And to some extent, I get it. This is intended for a young adult audience. But as an adult, I was just like, ugh, I don't really need this. So I did find it to be a little bit tedious. I thought that the virtual reality game Warcross was fun and it was pretty compelling. Like, I really like virtual reality in my books, and so it was really interesting to see how it was done in this book, and I generally think that it was done pretty well. And I will say that it was sometimes a little bit difficult to follow the action of the actual Warcross game, but I don't necessarily think it's a problem with the text. I think it's because I'm more on the aphantasia side, aka I can't really form functional pictures in my head. And I think that if you can, it's probably going to be just fine. But it was a little bit difficult to follow some of the action sequences. I will also say there is a very strong romantic storyline in this. It is so strong that it occasionally overpowered the primary storylines, which I didn't love that imbalance. However, I was mostly okay because I think that the author did a pretty good job writing a more realistic romance between these two people who are, one of them is like Emika's like 18 or 19, and the love interest is like early 20s. So basically old enough to have some experience, but not old enough to avoid most mistakes, essentially. And so I felt that it was fairly believable between them. So while I was annoyed, I wasn't super annoyed. I did find the plot to be fairly predictable, but the ending, I did guess some of the parts of the ending, but I didn't guess them all, and I really, really appreciated that. And honestly, the last thing I'll say is that you do need to suspend disbelief for this book, but no more than you would have to for like a romance or a superhero comic. And if you can do so, it is, again, just a really fun, quick, easy read. And I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. And then I picked up Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, the second book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, which is an adult contemporary romance trilogy. And in this one, we're following Danny, who basically asks the gods for the perfect friends with benefits situation. Enter Zephyr, who is a security guard at the building where Danny is a professor. And there's a drill one day, and Zephyr ends up like carrying Danny out of the building. It's caught on video and uploaded to the internet with and where everybody sees it, and it goes viral because it's, hashtag couple goals. And so with all of this positive media attention, Zephyr is finding that he is getting like extra funding for his charity. So he goes to Danny and proposes that they fake date to keep the good vibes rolling for his charity. So Danny happily agrees with the intent that she will hopefully be able to get him into bed. And the story goes from there. There's a lot going on that is really good with this book. These are really strong characters that I genuinely liked each of them, and they had great chemistry. And I did think that this book had a nice balance between setting up the emotional development prior to having sexual relations with the actual steamy scenes that end up happening. I think it was pretty well balanced out. That being said, it is fairly sex forward. It's definitely on the steamier side for traditionally published romance, so just a heads up. I did also like that there were other storylines going on. It was a really nice balance between the storylines. I liked watching Zephyr kind of work through his anxiety issues, but the thing that I really struggled with is that Danny has commitment issues, and there's something about like how it was written that really I just found so annoying, because she had a bad relationship, and so it kind of scared her off commitment. It was like the first real relationship she had, and everything she's done since then has reinforced this idea that she's bad at relationships. And so she doesn't want to be in a relationship. And so anything that she does for Zephyr, any thought or feeling she has about him, if she can't immediately put it in the box of he's my friend and this is what I do for friends, then she just kind of shoves it away and never thinks about it. And she does this for like 3/4 of the book. And again, like, I've seen this happen before, maybe not for quite that long of a time, but like I've seen this happen before, and it doesn't annoy me nearly as much. So there's just something about how this is written that I hated. And maybe it's just because Danny is so smart in every other area of her life that it doesn't make sense to me that she would be able to just not recognize what is going on. But honestly, because of how this was happening, by the time, like, because she was like so just shoving everything away, and it took so long for her to finally figure out actually she has feelings for Zephyr, that by the time she finally did, I didn't really care anymore. And there was like a third act breakup that was super forced, and I kind of hated because Zephyr, like, they're both to blame, but Zephyr took on a lot of the blame for like when he was thinking about it in his own mind, and I understand why he did that, and I don't like it. I was kind of at that point thinking, like, a part of my brain for like the second half of the novel was just like, you're too good for her. Just don't wait for her. Like, this is not worth it for you, which is not what you want from a romance. And so I will say that, like, here's the thing. For me and romance, like, I don't care about the sex, to be fair. I like good sex scenes is icing on the cake, but it's not what I'm there for. And so having that good balance and having like hot scenes, it's not going to make up for any problems with the emotional development of the couple. And that's where I really had problems. And so even though there was so many good things about it, in like the second half of this book, I just didn't really enjoy. And so I ended up giving this 3 stars. And this is the second book in the Brown Sisters series that I have read and not ended up liking. So I am done with this series. I am not going to read number 3. And then after that, I picked up Where the Drowned Girls Go by Shauna Maguire, the 7th book in the Wayward Children series. So this is a young adult portal fantasy series, and essentially the premise is that children go through doors to other worlds, and then some of them end up coming back. And when they come back, a lot of them don't really adjust well to being here, and a lot of them end up at Miss Eleanor West's School for Wayward Children, where she tries really hard to help them adjust. In this book, we are following Cora, and Cora is struggling to deal with the aftermath of what happened in the 5th book, and she decides that Miss Eleanor's school is really not the right place for her, and she requests a transfer to a sister school called Whitethorn. And as soon as she arrives at Whitethorn, she realizes, maybe I have made a mistake. And the story goes from there. I loved this, honestly. These books are great. Going to Whitethorn kind of broke open the world building in this really, really interesting way. And it's just, we got to see such a different side of things. It was so cool. I also really loved Cora, and I really like her as a character. I know that there have been some amount of criticism because it's kind of uncomfortable to be in her head because Cora is fat, and a lot of her thoughts and inner monologue is about being fat and how society kind of views her. However, what I will say is that it is very realistic. Cora has been fat since she was young, basically. And so it absolutely makes sense to me that a lot of her thoughts would revolve around being fat because she's been teased since she was young. She's been concern troll since she kind of knew what that was. She doesn't necessarily care about the size of her body, but she knows that everybody else does. And regardless of what she thinks, society is making it her problem. So yeah, I can completely understand why her thoughts frequently revolve around her body and what other people are thinking of her body. It doesn't make for a particularly comfortable inner monologue, but it makes a lot of sense. I will say that if that is something that makes you uncomfortable, it's not the entire book. It's predominantly in the first 50 to 75 pages. And then after that, like, the action picks up to the point where Cora really can't dwell. But yeah, it's really, honestly, it's realistic, even if it is uncomfortable. I also really liked the integration of Regan, who is the protagonist of the sixth book. I didn't know how we were going to get Regan into this series, but I was really pleasantly surprised, and I'm very excited to see how her character adds to the overall series going forward. And the plot line itself, I thought was very, very solid. Sometimes the plot lines don't feel as complete to me, but I think that this one was just, yeah, it ended really, like, it had all the parts that I wanted it to have. And I think that between the plot and the world building, we have some really interesting places that we can go next, and I'm very excited to see what that is. I will say that because these are novellas, it never, I never have enough. I always end up with questions. There are some things that don't necessarily feel as fully fleshed out, but it's a series of novellas, so I completely understand that we are not going to have enough time to explore every little thing. Um, I just kind of maybe wish that we had some full-length novellas or full-length novels as well. But honestly, this was great. I enjoyed it, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. So there you go. That is everything I read and DNF'd in the first 2 weeks. If you are interested in how the points broke down, we're going to go backwards because that's easier. But Wayward Children, or Where the Drowned Girls Go, gave me 3 points because this is the last published book in this series. And so now I am caught up to 3 points. And then Take a Hint, Danny Brown gave me 2 points because it was a book in a series that I'm currently in the middle of. Warcross gave me 3 points because when I first picked it up, it was the second oldest book on my Goodreads TBR shelf. A People's History of the Vampire Uprising gave me 1 point because even though I DNF'd it, I did make it 125 pages. Gem and the Holograms, The Misfits, gave me 2 points because it's a graphic novel. Radiance by Catherine M. Valente. This gave me 1 point because even though I DNF'd it after 24 pages, this was the oldest book on my Goodreads TBR shelf when I picked it up. And again, I want to encourage myself to continue to do that, even if I am not necessarily sure if I'm going to like it. So 1 point. And then Cheer Up gave me 2 points because it's a graphic novel, which means that I have a total of 14 points for the first part of January, which is a fantastic start, and I am very excited to see just how many points I can rack up for January. But that is all I have, so if you have any thoughts or feelings about anything I read so far in this month, or you want to let me know what you've been reading, please leave me a comment down below. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!